stages of redemption. The Ramchal in a sefer called Maimer HaGeula adds totally different depth to these two stages, and to really appreciate it, let's see. It actually repeats itself both in Golus Mitzrayim, both in Golus Bavel, and in the Geula Achorah. So let's look at the Psukim a little bit and see if we can get some clarity. In the end of Bereshis, we have this cryptic sentence that Yosef says to the Jews. And he says, Pakod yifkod Elohim eschem v'alisem es atzmosai mizeh. What does it mean, Pakod yifkod Elohim eschem? Right? What does the word Pakod mean?
Remember.
It's a type of remembering, and we'll see what type of remembering it is, right? And what happened was, those were the key words, right? That when Moshe Rabbeinu came,
Right,
that was the code.
secret, right.
Later on it says, when he goes to Am Yisrael, later.
Can I get that?
V'yidaber es kol dimim v'yasa osaf zeni ha'am, v'ye'amein ha'am, the Am believed, v'yishmu ki pakad Adonai es b'nei Yisrael v'chira es anyam v'yikedu v'yishtachavu. So there's a concept called Pekida. There's an earlier verse beforehand, in the beginning of Shmos, where after Moshe Rabbeinu was already born, and there was already the foundation of Moshe's existence laid, so first of all, we have this stage where Klal Yisrael starts crying. Right? And they screamed out, and their cries went up to Hashem from the Avodah. And in the Chumash, you see screaming, and if you read it straight, it's a clear indication of process, but it's even more clear in the parsha of the where we say the in Kisava, where a person does the vidui and he's doing a chazaras hashir of the entire thing. So over there, it's extremely clear that this was a very monumental stage in the whole process. V'nitzak el Adonai Elohei Avoseinu v'yishma Hashem es kolenu v'yaris inu samalenu v'sachatzenu. So there's in terms of the steps of Yeshua, the fact that Klal Yisrael cried out, which in the Psukim and Shmos does not say they cried out to Hashem. They stam cried out, and then their pilos went up to Hashem. It was described in Dvarim as v'nitzak el Hashem Elohei Avoseinu. We actually cried out to Hashem, which is a fascinating thing to see when people cry out. That it's taken from Shamayim, because who you're crying out to. If you wouldn't have a concept of something above you, you wouldn't even cry. You just accept it. The fact that you're crying means to saying it's like appealing to whoever is supposed to care. Do something about it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, then what happened was Vayizkar Elohim es briso es Avram v'es Yitzchak and Yaakov. Vayar Elohim es bnei Yisrael v'yed Elohim. It says lashon of zechira. And miyad, right after later, Moshe hayaroyas tzoin. So the process technically started with zechira, but what practically happened was something called pakod yifkod Elohim eschem Hashem pakad es amo. Okay, so we'll see in the words. Now, what happens in this process? Moshe comes to Am Yisrael. He goes to Paro. He does his magical moments of the thing. Paro's like, get out of my face. You guys, I don't, lo yadas Hashem, this is not working. He makes it worse. And what's the reaction of the people? Yush. And Moshe Rabbeinu is like, I don't get it. You set me, and lama ha'arosam es ha'am hazeh. Right? V'yashav Moshe ela Hashem v'yom Adonai, lama ha'arosam ha'am hazeh, lama shalachthani. This is called Geula? What is this business? And Hashem says, Atatira, you're going to see, right? And that was a chet. That was a big chet to Moshe Rabbeinu, not understanding, having enough trust. And as we spoke about yesterday, miyad acharei ve'era Avram Yitzchak Yaakov be'el shadash milah nati lehem. Right? He's mentioning Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and as Rashi says, your forefathers, they didn't have this midah. They were able to trust me when they didn't understand. Right? And this is part of the gedula of Moshe Rabbeinu of learning to be the manning of Klal Yisrael and trusting these Mahalchei Shamayim, even though he doesn't understand it. But what we do see clearly is that the stage of starts with Zechira, Pikida. Pikida has some kind of Hisorus, even the Am is involved, and then it kind of crashes. The next shlav is Nisim Gluim. We start the Aseret Hamakos, and everything is in a totally different space, and end up we having Geula Shleim. Okay? Right? Hashem uses, in order for us to understand any Hanhagas of Shamayim, we need to understand it through our Kalim. Yibisari Echse Eloha. Okay? So he designed, he expressed the midos of himself in ways that we can relate to, and uses patterns that we identify with, even though he doesn't have the same limitations as we do. But so the process of memory, when a person remember something, it means it's not that they didn't know it, they knew it. It was somewhere buried, but it wasn't on the forefront of their consciousness. Mm-hmm. And that when somebody remembers something, it changes its location. Before it was this tonight, somewhere in my filing cabinet, and now it's in place of where it's going to determine what I'm going to do right now. Mm-hmm. That's a way of describing. Of course, Hashem doesn't have limitations, and it was a choice. It was a choice to, similar to what it says by the Sar Hamashkim, by Yishkachehu, right? Lo zochar es Yosef by Yishkachehu. So, like Anoichi Hastir Astir Espanai, there's a decision when we go to Golus, and we had this, he told us it's going to happen. It's not like, oh, I forgot, the old man I promised. Yadoa Teida, Ki ger zeh zarach haberetz olehem, arba moshana. It's going to happen, which means I am going to not remember, I'm not going to put the forefront in my minds of my hanhaga, the tsaras that you're going through, for 400 years. Expect that. And then I'm going to. So it's not the way you described it as just this, old man forgetting, but it is clear difference in the hanhaga of where is the tsar of Am Yisrael in his face, in his decision, in having causality in what's going to happen, or is it push on the side and something he's not paying attention to? That's a difference between shichacha and zechira. Creating his whole intention of the whole writing of the Sefer Torah, Niglis and Pnimius, is to give us an understanding. Right. We have limitations that have often to do with where we're holding, but his ultimate goal is to give as much understanding to humanity as it's possible for humanity to contain, and that's a lot. So, and he did it. He could have the entire Sefer Maisa Bereshis. He could have not spoken out. He could have just said, here's the world, guys." He did it in a very organized fashion with 10 utterances in order we should be able to understand the process. That's a microcosm of his understanding of how he relates to the entire world. He has systems. He gave us over the Nevuah. He gave us over Pnimi Satorah. And we're like, yes, let's try to understand this as much as possible. So we're meant to understand. Now you're making a good point. You asked a very logical question. How does the system work if he made Xera 400 years, right? And then suddenly it sounds like he remembered through our prayers. What would have happened? Would he have done it earlier? So this is a topic that we speak about in the Haggadah, Chishav Esaketz, that he changed the way the Xera was tailored, that instead of it being 400 years in Mitzrayim, the Xera was Niskayim, 210 years, and starting 400 from the time of Yitzchak, because Yitzchak was also a ger. We didn't have Zechus and Eretz Yisrael then, and he dealt with the Xer. Now, is that the way the psukim look and sound was that it was a result of the Za'aka of Am Yisrael crying out. In other words, it sounds like we can't handle this anymore. We understand in the deepest sense of Am Yisrael, there's a certain Kabbalah. In other words, until that point, there wasn't that Zaka. So what were they saying? What were they doing? Okay, we accept our lot. This is what we need to be doing, right? But at that point, they're like, we can't do this anymore, right? And Hashem agreed with that Za'aka and says, you're right, you can't do this anymore. I'm going to switch the entire plan. Now, it's been said that, and I have to check this where the makar of this is, but it's been said, had we been able to hold the Gullus for 400 years, we would have been able to deal with this Gullus in a totally different way. The Geulas Mitzrayim is a remez to the Geulas Edom, right? The Geulas Edom wasn't something that has to happen. It was a result of the Chet HaMeraglim, right? As it says, Bachot Tichba Balayla, and you're going to have to go into the Amim and things like that. So nothing is worked out that it had to be that way. Had we been able to survive in Mitzrayim, had there been more resilience on Klal Yisrael, maybe not to give up Bris Milah, all we had left over was the three things. Had we done more than that, maybe we would have been able to be more resilient, right? And stay in and it's not the first time that Am Yisrael as a unit has failed to be able to deal with the process of Golus, like Yosef, L'yochel Yosef lihisapek. He could have kept on going with the brothers, and it would have been more tikkun, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't deal with it. So we have sometimes where Yisurim are so much, we come to Hashem and He says we can't do this anymore, and He breaks the rules and He changes the rules for us. That's, I think, what's being described over here as the Zechira. He's like, yes, according to the original system, I shouldn't have done this, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to intervene. And if you look at the Rosh Hashanah davening of Zichronos, right, there's very many different places where Hashem does this. He's Zachor, Noach, right? Sometimes he's Pakod and sometimes he's Zachor. We have to understand each one on its own. It seems to me is more accurate is that something comes into the forefront of consciousness of the Hanhaga, right? And then the reassessment happens. So Zachor means to say there's the Kal Shavasam Elohim, and it's like, okay, this is, I see that I have a bris that I have to deal with over here. In other words, what's the bris? What does it mean you remember the bris? Right? So the part of the bris that I would assume he remembered was when Avraham Avinu asked Bama Eda. So look in the Ramban, he explains that Bama Eda is a question of how do I know it's going to happen? Maybe it won't. Maybe we'll mess up. And Hashem made a bris with him that it doesn't make a difference. You can mess up. My name is kosher, is interwoven with you. That's what a bris means. We are deeply connected now, beyond how you act, and therefore it doesn't make a difference if Am Yisrael is now roi to do the geula. What they've done, the bris now is in danger because if these people disappear, then the whole bris is batal. And that was the sakana that Hashem was saying, is that they're screaming out like we're going to break. Okay, so there's the bris. So I would assume that the Zechira is more is looking at the forefront of the actual circumstances that are happening, and then making decisions based on noticing those circumstances. I understand this because there is a limud that will make things much sharper for you at understanding Havas Hashem if you're willing to make this step, which is we're not talking about His essence. Every single piece of information that we have ever processed that has to do with God, except the very fact that He has an essence, we're never talking about His essence, because His essence is something that we cannot. What we know about it is that it's completely shalem, and that He doesn't need to be created. After that, He made a system of ways of interacting with Him that very much is formulated in the way that human beings can be conscious of. So the way He made His hanaga was similar to how a human works. That in the hanaga of Shamayim, whether or not what's going to happen in the actual hashgacha and the actual interventions in the world feels like we can relate to it as forefront of consciousness and not forefront of consciousness. Those are words for us to interact with systems that he wasn't using to make his decisions in Hanhaga, and now he brought it to the place, the moked of where he makes Hanhaga his decisions from, and he put it there and says, okay, now we're going to make decisions from there. The way we can understand that is on a human level is with midos, and in the midos systems it actually looks like that. It was something. There's a midah of shechicha and there's a midah of zechira, and they are how they sound, not in the forefront and yes in the forefront. Does the Almighty God who doesn't have any lack need any of this stuff? Absolutely not. And therefore, it's going to be in our amuno. We have to say this is not for him, but it is for us. And in the details of what he made, he actually made real systems in order for us to understand that through that he uses to govern us, and therefore we can really relate to it on that level, and it's not untrue. Does that help you?
No.
For what Pnimius HaTorah is revealing is that he created ways of interaction with him called spheros, called midos, and he uses those kelim in order to interact with human beings. The same way the Sefer Torah, even if you wouldn't know anything about Kabbalah, you would say when he created Or, right? How did he do it? He doesn't need to utter anything, but he didn't do it that way. He actually did it through an utterance. Was there really an utterance in Shemayim? Well, if you believe the Torah, there was. Not only you actually have to, if you have any idea of thought of what creation actually means, which means it doesn't have any reason to exist in the second moment more than the first moment, it has to be a constant, yihi ar. And that those osios, la'olam dvecha nitzav bashamayim, as the pasuk says, and the way the Sfar and the Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Tanya, those osios exist now. They're the atoms, the same way we all are conscious. I mean, science has accepted that matter is built up of things that we can't necessarily touch and see, but they are realities, right? And then you go deeper, and then everything's really energy, right? And that's a reality. There's an even deeper reality that the osios that are uttered from Shemayim, he put things in osios. He didn't have to do that. He's not limited. Doesn't need these forms. But there actually are spiritual kelim called osios that were used to formulate the creation of everything we perceive. That's an expression of systems that are real, we can understand, and that's why we not only can we understand, we can interact with it. Like I told you before, Yodea B'Tzaref Osios Shabo Nivu Shamayim Ba'aretz. The whole Sefer Yetzirah is built on this concept. You can machlif the osios. There's once a story of, I forgot his name now, one of the Rosh Hashivas of Parat Yosef, and it was in the middle of the war, and he came back and he was very happy, and his son asked him, why are you so happy? And he said, because there was a gzera from Shemayim that Hitler should come and invade Syria, and he's palalnu, and we were machlif the osios from Syria to Russia. And you know that his invasion of Russia was insane, complete insanity, right? Hitpalanu yichlafnu to otiot misuria leRussia. Okay, if that works, let's do it, right? There are people who are so interacting with Hanhagas of Shemayim, Tfilas. Baal Shem Tov had many times he would go to places. All of these are for us to be able to have real interactions with Shemayim. So, and the deeper level, what the Torah is hiding, the same way in a human being, you see the person's dibur, you experience the person's dibur, you see their maisim, you don't necessarily see their midos. Similarly, Hashem set up the Torah in the same way. And instead of the Torah being an expression of midos, it's an expression of dibur. Well, we also know that he used midos to why he decided to speak this way, what midah was going on, quote unquote, inside of him. Right? And we know that there's 10 midos that are hiding within all of those 10 utterances and within the 10 dibros. And the more we understand these midos, able to understand Hanhagas Hashem. So it's not anthropomorphosis, it's something very real. It's just not necessary for him, it's necessary for us. Have you ever had a situation where you were thinking to yourself, you know what? I am not tolerating this. This is totally wrong. I'm going to give to this person over their head. And then you looked at it again and you said to yourself, it's not going to be good for this person. It's not going to go for the long-term situation. I'm going to hold myself back, and I'm going to make other decisions because I see the greater picture. I see something that what was going on in this person, why it motivated them. You never had that switch inside of you? You
I did. I'm human. I had that.
So Hashem he made systems that we can relate to. Mm-hmm. So he did a similar thing. There was a very strong reason to give it over the head because we did something wrong. It was really bad, and it would be really good for us to really deal with the consequences of our actions. And then he looked at the greater picture and he said, that's not good. And he had rachamim. And the same way we do that, we can understand what Hashem was doing and relate to it and deal with it. Sometimes they're super din, and that we have to deal with that. Sometimes we have the ability to change it. Well, what about this? Would you look at this same way a human being, if you would interact and you tell a human being, you have to take this into consideration. And that works. Right. That's for us to learn how to talk to Hashem. When Moshe Rabbeinu was Hashem said, "Heref meni v'ashmideim," right? He was giving a hint, like, pull away from me. In other words, don't pull away from me. Say something. There's what to work at over here. Avraham Avinu was sitting here arguing with God about Sodom. Like, what is this? God's almighty. He doesn't need. Oh, thank you, Avraham. I didn't think of that one. Right? He wants our shutfus in the world, and he in order for us to understand what's going on, we have to understand there's din, there's rachamim, different perspectives. Some things are being focused on now, some things are being ignored. Bring it to the forefront of the conversation, things will change. So the development of human beings, Hashem relates to us within the limitations of time and sequence, so we can participate. So in the growth of Moshe Rabbeinu, it was extremely important for him to say, wait a minute, this is wrong. And then to say, no, I understand. There are things that go beyond that.
I'm going to need to go.
Okay.
Thank you. I took a lot from the share as it is.
Great. I'm so happy. In order for that growth to happen, it had to happen in the sequence of time. So Moshe had to experience where there's something wrong in the sequence of time, that this is not going the way it's supposed to. Us being beyond time, him being beyond time is not a factor, because again, he made time and space for human beings to have a relationship with him. And so he uses his relationship with us in the windows and the limitations of time for us to process it like that. So it's always going to be true, even though he's above time. Time is an extremely huge factor in every single spiritual process. Sequence, time, order, this first, this second, this third, this fourth, this fifth. He doesn't need any of that, but we do. Mm-hmm. So he's always going to play in the relationship with us through those sequences. Unless he's not going to say, since I know exactly what you're going to do anyway, so then there's no point in you doing it, because that's not the way he set up the world. He set up the world that even though I know what's going to happen, you have the ability to choose, right? And he's going to give everything to us based on something which is already known to him, but it's not known to us. So our experience will be through what is the truth of our experience.
Right.
This is what the Ravid says, that if you think that Hashem can't limit himself, you're making him limited. Mm-hmm. In other words, the Soda Tzimtzum is the biggest lack of limitation. He does not have to limit himself, but he does. He actually decides, Tzur Yolad Chateshi, Ki'ilu, I don't have the ability to now go as Ami because they didn't do their part. Well, why not? Just do it. Yeah, I could, but I decided not to. And the limitations are real in the sense that it was his decision to do the Hanhaga only that way. So you won't have things breaking time. In fact, you b'derech kal won't even have things breaking teva. It's a chisaron when Hashem breaks teva. You know the story of Abaye and Rava in Gemara and Shabbos, where a man, his wife died and he couldn't nurse his son, so he had a nace happen and he grew breasts. And so Abaye said, "Wow, what an amazing thing that is." And the Baba said, "That's a terrible thing. It's a shini ma'isa brachus." He doesn't want usually to break anything that he made into the world. So even if sometimes it's necessary, like in this case of Mitzrayim, it's not Ritzono. His Ratzon is not limited, but he does have Ratzon. And the Ratzon can be for a limited process.
Okay, I'll have to absorb this.
Okay. Okay. So far we've learned about Pakida and Zachor and Mitzrayim. Okay, now let's look in Ezra, right? So, Koresh, in the beginning of Ezra, wakes up, Melech Paras, and he starts waking up. Mi bochem mikol amo yelav yimo yal Yerushalayim asher beYehuda vayiven es vis hamikdash. And the pasuk says somewhere, ki Pakod es amo. Where is that? Somewhere it says over here. I know it says it over here because I remember looking at it. Kol amar Korach melech Paras, kol mamlechos haaretz nasan li Hashem Elohei hashamayim. He gave me everything. V'hu pakad ailai livnos lo bayis v'Yerushalayim asher beYehuda. Okay, so this topic of Pakida, what happens? He does this whole process. There's a process through Bavel. There's all kinds of people involved. Then what happens is Kosav Sitna, right? Al Chashverosh Kosav Sitna, and he stops the entire Binyan Beis Hamikdash. How does Am Yisrael react? The entire Purim story. Incredible Yush. Mm-hmm. Then we have the Purim Suda Nes. We have afterwards Ezra and Nehemiah come, and we have the resurgence of the Beis Hamikdash and rebuilding the Beis Hamikdash. Again, these two shlavim, one is called Pakida, and there's a situation, and then afterwards, Shlav Shei, there's a stage of Yush that happens in between, and then there's a more Gilui of actually Beis Hamikdash being rebuilt. So Shlavim is the same Soda Nesira, which is that in order for it to be embedded in the person and the Nivra, in ourselves, that we have our own Ratzon coming back, we need the Shlav of where there's sleeping Ki'ilu from Shamayim, and that is the fuel for the next Slav of Zachor. I agree with you that's 100% true. In Purim it's clear in the Arian, it's clear in the whole system of every time there's a Nivra, there's the process of Nesira and the process of Zira. And you're right that there's that Shlav of Ki'ilu forgetting and which is less than Zachira. But you know what? Let's let the Ramchal is focusing on the end of the Geula more than the beginning, and let's see how he describes it. He describes it very much also in the Pnimius of Miros of Hashem, and it gives us a lot of awe. So let's see what we can. Da ki le Geula nimtzo shnei zmanim. Umatzanu megalos Mitzrayim megalos Babel, but no delano shekein yeh ba'asi ligalos v'her v'yameinu. No delano. He doesn't. I don't think he speaks it out right in here in these words, but it's no delano from Yecheskel, clear as day. Two stages. So we spoke about. Al eila shnei zmanim nera pasuk in Micha. Al tismechu oyvai li. Right, and the second part of the pasuk is ki eshev b'choshech Hashem orli. First of all, the pasuk says my enemies shouldn't be happy with me. Shouldn't be rejoice. And then why? Because I'm going to say when I sit in darkness, Hashem will give me light. Right, and the Ramchal is explaining that nothing is extra in these psukim, and in the Sefer itself, he gives a bunch of examples of psukim that are written that way. There's two shlavim, and the first shlav is less or, and the second shlav is always more or. So let's see what Ruben says. Shlav rishon soda pakida ramzu b'pasuk atismuchu oyvarli kenafalti kamti. Right. First of all, don't be rejoicing of my falling, because nafalti kamti. And it doesn't take a genius to see our history, this unfolding, right? Especially with the hisorus of Zionus and Shivas Zion already in the 1800s, and the culmination of maybe the Yirush of that at least, maybe there's a lot of shlavim in that, but at least the Holocaust comes in the middle and destroys this entire process, that we definitely understand that the reaction to that is, Al tismechu oivai li kenafalti kamti. That even though I fell down, like by Haman, and like by in Mitzrayim, Nafalti, there's Tichbor Avodah al Anoshim, where Al Yishu Dvar Sheker, and they Arba Lashonos of Geula, Nafalti Kamti. I fell down, I'm going to get up. That's the first shlav of Pekida, is even though I fell down, I'm going to get up. One of the simanim that happens in Pekida is that the Hanhagas Hashem works through people and is not begilui, just like even though Moshe Rabbeinu did moifsim, right, to Paro, but so did Paro. Okay, you brought Kishuv to Mitzrayim, Chazal say, come on, it's like it's like being preschool. Right. So basically, it's like there's no Paro reacts and says, Mi Hashem Asher Yishmael V'Kolo. It's complete hastara, like it is in the Megillah. You had Koresh, but you can have Achashverosh coming and being able to make a party, which is with the Big Day Kahuna, and saying this whole Geula is not happening. Okay, the Iker Mechuvan L'Tikun Hachitzonos, and the second bechina of what's the matara of Pekida is Tikun Hachitzonius. Let him explain that means. Sod Guf Halu Umi. In order to me'ached the Am, like we had in Mitzrayim, by Yelamein Ha'am, there was the Zakanim were able to go to Mitzrayim. There's togetherness going on of like this idea of, okay, Hashem Vayaman Ha'am, Hashem Pakod es Amo, right? And Koresh gets everybody together, and a national, let's go. Hashem told me we're going to bring Yerushalayim again. But Be'ikr, what happens is the Hakim Yisrael mi offer Hagolos. Lashivam Pizuram, like it says in Yechezkel, to bring them all together from what the Abrakan Fasaris, which is something which really happened much more in Golus Edom than it happened beforehand. In Golus Bavel, Be'ikr, I'm not saying there weren't other places that we went to, but the main force of Am Yisrael was in Golus, in Bavel, and that's where all of the major things happened as the Ummah is in Bavel. Whereas in what Yechezkel is talking about, after Golus Edom, we went all over the whole world, right? That was a different. We needed a different level of kima from that, which is Yechezkel is describing. Lahashivam elat masa, and they're back physically in Eretz Yisrael. La'achar mikein yavo shlav basar hazachira, v'hu ramav b'pasuk ki eisha b'choshech Hashem orli. The difference in Zechira is that there's more revelation. Yakiru hakol ki Hashem yisbarach v'esyodo hamoshelas. Upepekida, in the shlav of Pekida, and I think that it's important to understand the words. What does the word Pekida connotate? What does the word Zechira connotate? Zechira connotates, it's interesting, the Ramchal, it describes that even though Pekida comes before Zechira, really Zechira comes before Pekida, like it says in Mitzrayim. It's just that it's like Soif Masav Machshavat Chila. What do I really want to accomplish? I really want to accomplish the Geula Asida. He remembered. He puts his poor friends, he remembers the bris, and it's like, okay, this is where we are holding now. What I really want to accomplish is, I want to accomplish Gilui. I want to accomplish complete Yitziyah from Geula. How do I do that? Hashem Pakod es Amo. Because Pakod is a way of remembering that has to do with action. It has to do with counting. It has to do with appointing. It's saying, okay, we take into consideration. It's practical. It's the integration. The shlav of, if you want to talk about it in a human being, so when a person wants to make a shift inside of their life, right? So the first shlav is not talk about practicality. It's to get them to understand where the golos was, where their ratzon was down, why it was down, what can we do to heal it, and bring back the internal desire to say, okay, I can do something better, I want to be something better, I can see my life being a certain way. Then once that internal shift happens, which can happen in an instantaneous shift, there is an entire level of integration has to happen. Okay, now, because I'm in this new space, let's go analyze my life and what changes I'm going to make in my life to try to integrate this shift that I had to my practical life. And that's a very unstable stage. It's not like, yes, it's hunky-dory, this internal shift and everything's fine, because within all of those details of integration, there's all kinds of mechanisms which were built into us, which we resist that change that happened inside when it comes into this detail and this detail. Oh my God, I actually have to open up my mouth to this person? Well, that was a good idea theoretically, but if it actually means that I have to tell this person to stop hurting me, I'm not sure I want to do that, right? And it's another level of integration. So Pekida is taking this internal shift that happened in the Hanhaga of Shamayim, and it's saying, okay, practically speaking, we need a leader now. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe Roy is that. Okay, let's bring Moshe out into the world. Okay, Korash, it's time to bring everybody back into Eretz Yisrael, right? It has to do with the Chalutzim, the Herzl, these people. Okay, Chevra, Yalla, go and make a congress and a Tzioni and start to Mishageh at the Umo to bring Shivas Tzion. Practicality, that's Pakod. Okay?
So how does that fit in with the idea of falling and coming and standing?
We'll get to that slowly. Shekain Olo Bahadeh Hasaga Bechira La'am. Ki Pekida says Galus Hashem Mederech Nisteres. Hasaga Hi Or LaAdam. V'chol Od Shelo Ba'elav Hareu Ki Yoshev B'choshech. Like the Psukim are describing, right? Ki Eshev B'choshech. Even though there was already this thing Nafalti Kamti. Eshev B'choshech. Because until I have this Behirus of Gilui of Das Hashem, even if I'm kamti, I'm still b'choshech. But Shnei Dvarim, this the Ramchal explains more. Shnei Dvarim tzorach shateda shelo husar hester panim ella lifnai v'lifnim. We know that obviously the situation of Golus is hester panim. What does hester panim mean? Let's just describe the words, right? Again, Hashem used words very clearly to describe something we can interact with, right? So if you're in a relationship with somebody and it's very close and intimate, there's smiles, they're talking to you face to face. If a person is angry, they turn their back on you. There's hester panim, they hide their face from you, right? Anochi hastir aster es panai. It's the worst type of hastara, because as Rabbi Nachman says, not only is he turning his back from you, but you don't even know that he's turning his back from you because he's like gone. You don't even know to search. If someone's in front of you and have their back to you, it's like, can you please turn around? But if that person left the room and like maybe he left the relationship completely, I don't even know that I'm trying to get him to turn his face. I don't even know that he left us completely. That's and that's a situation of serious possibility of yush. So when the zechira happens in the beginning of the process, the hastara doesn't change. The experience of the Am is not like, hello Hashem, you're back in our life. No, definitely not. There was a real change inside of the Ratzon of Shamayim and Hanhaga. It's like, okay, we're starting a new process. But it happened, all of the Shinuyim happened lifnai v'lifnim. And the expression of lifnai v'lifnim is that things happen in the Shechina, the Shoresh of Am Yisrael, that affects everybody, but they not necessarily have an internal explanation of why. They just know, like, okay, everybody's getting up now. We're talking about going back there to Yisrael. We have to talk about going to Yisrael for 500, 600, 800, 2,000 years, but now we're going to start talking about it. Whoa, why does that happen? Oh, it's because there's so much pogromim, like there wasn't enough pogromim beforehand, right? Okay, now they make it sense to themselves, but it started in a deeper place that anybody can identify. Makom nishmas Yisrael l'lachutz ki kol elah ha'oros v'chol adveim derech pnimius ha'oros heim v'lo niru ha'chutza. They're in the internal oros, the internal spiritual energies that are in the world. V'alkein lo higia mehem yisoros v'lo tikun rak li Yisrael. First of all, there's no incredible hisorus in even in Am Yisrael, but also the main change happens within Knesset Yisrael. It's not a change, a universal change. V'teida shebahayir ha'omes v'zos ha'achemda ha'tshuka az timashach Yisrael ora gdol v'atzuma akol nishmosem afilu noda begilui ach nishmosem kiblu zos ha'ora. This is something that we totally can see and feel, as we've spoken about many times, that when there's a change, that there's many shifts that happened in Am Yisrael at different times, and there's many shifts that happen in the world. like industrial revolution or psychology, AI, things that are like suddenly everyone's talking about the same topic. Like, isn't that kind of weird? Like, it just seems to like everybody in France and in China and in America and everyone's doing the same things, because shifts don't happen on individuals. Shifts happen on the core spiritual energy that is dictating each Am, right? And the Am of Hashem is dictated when Hashem is Zocher Esamo. It's beautifully laid out in the Psukim of Shir Hashirim, right? And this actually is completely a description of the whole process of Ani Yeshena v'libi er, right? My heart is awake. Suddenly the Shekhinah wakes up. Kol doidi doifek. He's knocking on the door. I'm sleeping. I don't even like what's going on. But my heart is hearing. Pischili achoisi rayasi yonasi tamasi sheroishi nimoto kivusose resise laila. Right? So the doidi is saying, I think, well, open the door for me. He's knocking on the door. This is Hashem. This is when the Zechira starts. He wakes up Am Yisrael and says, "Come, wake up." And what do we say? Patashti et kotantai. I took off where are my pajamas? I took off my clothes. I can't even knee you. I can't even put on nice clothes to have a real. I already washed my feet. I can't get dirty. I can't do the work that has to actually be done to this relationship. Dordi sholach yoda minachar. But what does he do? He puts his hand in the hole, and we get a glimpse of what it means to be in Zveikus Hashem, and suddenly umeya yohamu olav, right? All of my internal organs like, wow, okay. So kamti ani liftoach. Suddenly there's a hisorus going towards that door, and we're ready to make this relationship with Dodivi. I put on all of my besamim, right? Over al kapos amanu. Open the door. Patachti ani ledodi. Gone. There was this incredible hisorus, and then suddenly he's not there anymore. This is a perfect description of the shlav of Pakida, right? What really happened was this internal shift that woke us up. Ani yeshena, libi air, because I'm hearing my dodi dafak badelas, and then he does something which really wakes us up. And it's like, okay, everybody, we need to get into movement. There's like the am big stuff, pakad. We do changes. We get dressed. We start going towards to open the door. And then we're going to learn, boom, there's this stage of like, wait, it seems to be all a fiction. He's gone. He left us again, right? And then I start going around. It's not simple. There's wars. It's difficult stuff. There's karbonas. But what happens is, like you were explaining, that there's a real hisorus imtim to his matagidilo shecholas avani. This is the person who was sleeping before. He was saying, or she was saying, how can I even get dressed? He's knocking on the door. It's like, I can't do this. I can't do this relationship. It's too difficult. Too much trouble. And suddenly she's going around in the shvakim of the ear saying, cholas ahava ani. That's what the process of Pakida does. And like you were describing it before. And it's not stam, as you intuited, it's not stam that there was a pull away. Because if we're sleeping, even when we wake up, we have to have our commitment to the relationship in a way that's very pnimi. And so in the process of when there's this golus and there was this hisorus, it gives us an opportunity to develop our own kalim of ahava and say, okay, we really want this. And that gives koach to the next shlav of Zachir. But let's see how he explains
it. Is that when things got worse in Mitzrayim? Is that the...
So did it work in Mitzrayim?
Is that dovetail with,
the
door and he's not there?
I would say that I think that in Mitzrayim, you're talking about the latest ha'am. And when we're mushal as a baby, so this is a process that you do with a teenager. You don't do this process with a baby. It's not like, the baby's not taking me seriously, so I'm going to pull away, and then the baby's suddenly going to have their own internal understanding of the importance of the relationship. Nah, it's a little vague, right? So we have to understand why there was this process of Yush, but we see specifically in the Torah, and if you go through the entire process of Aseres HaDibros, Aseres HaMakos, you have a Shinui in Mitzrayim, but did we have a Shinui in the Am, in what's really talking about? Because we know this is a question that is dealt with. The Leshem has a whole piece about it. He is so convinced about this question, he actually flips everything on its head. But the pshuto of the Ari is that if they would have the Chishav Isakates, if they would have stayed any longer, they wouldn't have been able to leave because of the level of kfira and muna of yush that were happening while the makas were happening. It's a very bizarre thing to understand. And my what I understand it is that Paro was actually surviving. The Iranian trick. It's like, you're blowing our heads up, but we're still here. You can't beat us, right? So we have incredible power, right? And Ad Kedei Kach, who sent them out of Mitzrayim? Hashem was misader on purpose. That no, you have to ask Paro's permission. Are you ready? No, I'm not ready. Oh, so you're still the Melech. Oh, you're still in charge. Okay, fine, you can go. Vahi b'shalach Paro es ha'om. He's still sending us out. And that's why they freaked out. It's like he's coming back. They weren't really ever freed. The Psukim, when it says in the Arba Lashonos of Geula, right? So, what's the Lashonos? No. You're not going to be slaves. Practical. Right? You're not even going to work them at all. Not only the sevel, you're not even going to have any level of working. Geula is a separate stage. It needs v'shvatim gedolim. When did that happen? Kriyas Yamsuf. Until then, they were avodim borchim. They were not geulim. Our master's coming to chase. Hashem set it up. 3 days. You're going away the whole time. He's telling them 3 days, 3 days, 3 days. Suddenly they break the rules and he's coming to chase them down. Okay, we're in trouble now, right? That's not Geula. That whole consciousness. Hashem was misadered in order to teach them that he gave Malchus to Paro in order that Paro should destroy himself. Because Paro, with all of his insanity and all of his hate, he thought he was still in charge. He chased after them. He chased after them so much, he walked straight into the trap. It's like, oh, the sea is splitting for them. Well, let's go in there too. That makes so much sense. His hate was so overtook him that Hashem used his own midos to destroy him. Right? And no, it says Shir Hashem Kigola, Sus v'roich boy Rama vayom. Sus and his rider he threw into the yam. The Sus and the rider together he threw in the yam. How did he throw into the yam? They drove into the yam. He threw them into the yam. Right? So he used the Sus and the rochbo. So Geula happened in Mitzrayim. Really, it didn't happen when there was a huge shift that happened. I'm not going to put it down in Leil Tesvav when we were able to actually leave. But that was very much like the Arizal says, was a very strong light that was mistalik the next morning. And they had all the work they had to do, and part of that work was Kriyas Yamsuf. And that's why the whole process of Pesach starts with Leil HaSeder, but it continues, the Yom Tov continues until Shvi Shal Pesach, because the Geula is very much not finished. And then it's also a stage. And the fourth stage, L'chachti Eschim La'am, happens 49 days later, right? So the process of Geula is a large process. So the question is, in Mitzrayim, did this actually happen in which the Am Yisrael was able to fix themselves through the period of the years that happened? I would assume not. I would assume that wasn't a successful process in Mitzrayim. Why did it happen in Mitzrayim? We have to, maybe Ramchal will explain it to us. But right now, it's a good question. Why would he do it that way?